From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I hope this autumn will be our Arab Spring. That might be a little optimistic, but I believe dignity has no borders or flags.
Occupying the world. 1 month ago today, Occupy Wall Street began. Now it's gone global, as more than 1,000 cities around the globe are rocked by protest. We'll hear from people in Greece, Japan, Italy, Latin America, and London, and here in the United States, where police arrested hundreds of people over the weekend at demonstrations and occupations, including in Washington, D.C., not far from the dedication of the statue of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., one of the greatest practitioners of civil disobedience.
We want to bear witness today that we know the relation between corporate greed and what goes on too often in the Supreme Court decision.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets Saturday in a global day of rage inspired by the Occupy Wall Street encampment. Protests reportedly took place in 1,500 cities, including 100 cities in the United States. The day's largest protest took place in Italy, where over 200,000 people took to the streets of Rome. While the protests were peaceful around the globe, in Rome, some people set cars ablaze and broke the window of banks and shops, sparking the country's worst riots in a decade. News reports said some of the 12 arrested for the riots were believed to belong to right-wing soccer fan groups, while others were linked to anarchist groups. In Britain, thousands of protesters marched on the London Stock Exchange.
The issue is global, so for the first time we have a truly global movement that is bringing together people from different countries, focusing on one aim, to change the financial system and how it interacts with governments, because we feel that we're not fairly represented through the democratic system as it is now, which seems to benefit a handful of banks as opposed to the 99% of the public.
Here in the United States, police arrested hundreds of people over the weekend at demonstrations and occupations inspired by the Occupy Wall Street movement, which began a month ago today in New York's financial district. In Illinois, police arrested about 175 Occupy Chicago protesters after they refused to leave Grant Park, the site of President Obama's election night victory rally. In Arizona, nearly 100 people were arrested in Occupy protests in Phoenix and Tucson. 19 members of Occupy Raleigh in North Carolina were charged with trespassing for refusing to leave the state capitol grounds. 24 protesters were arrested at Occupy Denver. In Washington, D.C., Princeton University professor Cornel West was among 19 people arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court during a protest against money in politics. And in New York, at least 92 people were arrested Saturday during a day of action that saw tens of thousands march to Times Square. Earlier in the day, about 24 people were arrested at a Citibank in Manhattan while they attempted to move their money out of the bank. The protesters were reportedly locked into the bank and then detained. Bank officials accused the protesters of being disruptive. Video shot outside the bank shows an undercover police officer dragging one woman into the bank and then arresting her.
You were inside. You were inside with everybody else.
I'm a customer.
You were inside. Yes, but you were inside.
I'm a customer.
No.
What are you doing?
What the hell?
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't be dominated right now. He's not doing anything. He's not doing anything wrong. Oh my God.
What are you doing?
This is wrong. This is wrong. It's wrong.
In a major development from Africa, hundreds of Kenyan troops backed by tanks and helicopter gunships have invaded southern Somalia in Kenya's largest military operation in years. The move comes as Kenya declared war on the Somali militant group Shabab. There are reports warplanes have already carried out airstrikes on Shabab strongholds in southern Somalia. Kenya's blamed Shabab for a recent string of kidnappings of Europeans in Kenya. Meanwhile, President Obama has deployed about 100 combat-equipped U.S. forces, including special operations personnel, to Central Africa to help fight against Uganda's renegade Lord's Resistance Army and its leader, Joseph Kony. In a letter to congressional leaders, Obama wrote, quote, "I have authorized a small number of combat-equipped U.S. forces to deploy to Central Africa to provide assistance to regional forces that are working toward the removal of Joseph Kony from the battlefield. The 100 troops, primarily U.S. Special Operations Forces, will reportedly assist forces from Uganda, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo." In June, it was revealed the U.S. would provide drone aircrafts to Uganda and Burundi as part of a $45 million military aid package. Uganda is also the site of a recent major oil discovery. Researchers estimate the Lake Albert Basin holds between 2.5 and 6 billion barrels of oil. It's the largest onshore oil discovery in sub-Saharan Africa in more than 2 decades. In news from the Middle East, the U.S. is intensifying its drone war in Yemen. On Friday, the U.S. carried out at least 5 drone strikes targeting members of al-Qaeda's Yemeni branch. 9 people were reportedly killed, including Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, the 21-year-old son of Anwar al-Awlaki, the U.S.-born cleric who was assassinated in a separate U.S. drone strike last month. Meanwhile, anti-government protesters in Yemen are continuing to come under attack by forced allies to President Ali Abdullah Saleh. At least 13 demonstrators have been killed since Sunday. The Guardian reports protesters are writing their names across their chests for identification in case they're killed in anti-Saleh marches. The Obama administration's announced it's pulling the plug on a long-term home care program included in the 2010 health care reform law. The Community Living Assistance Services and Supports, or CLASS program, was designed to give the disabled and elderly cash to receive care at home instead of usually more expensive institutional care. The program was co-authored by the late Senator Ted Kennedy and Democratic Congressmember Frank Pallone of New Jersey. Pallone criticized the Obama administration's decision, saying, quote, "While we're fighting so hard against Republican attempts to cut Medicaid, abandoning the CLASS Act is the wrong decision. Soon enough, those in need will have nowhere to go for long-term care," he said. In news from Alabama, a federal appeals court has blocked enforcement of parts of the state's controversial anti-immigrant law that's already forced thousands of Latinos to flee the state. One provision temporarily blocked allowed state and local officials to check the immigration status of public school students. In political news, the billionaire right-wing Koch brothers are back in the news. A new investigation from the Associated Press has exposed deep ties between Republican presidential hopeful Herman Cain and David and Charles Koch, the brothers who helped bankroll the Tea Party movement. Cain's campaign manager, his former spokesperson, and at least 6 other current and former paid employees and consultants have worked for the Koch-funded Americans for Prosperity. Cain also credits a businessman who served on an AFP advisory board with helping devise his 999 plan to rewrite the nation's tax code. The Israeli group Peace Now has condemned a plan by the Israeli government to build more than 2,600 housing units in a new urban settlement in Jerusalem. Peace Now said the plan was approved last week by a municipal committee which had given the go-ahead for construction on the site. Hagit Ofran is the director of Settlement Watch at Peace Now.
The plan is to build another new Israeli settlement in East Jerusalem for the first time since the 19th when they built Har Homa. And this specific plan, if it's implemented, it might destroy the possibility for two-state solution and land swap.
Longtime Egyptian opposition leader Ayman Noor has been barred from running in Egypt's upcoming presidential election expected to take place in 2013. A Cairo court ruled him ineligible because of a controversial forgery conviction. Noor was charged with the crime in 2005 ahead of his run against former Egyptian dictator Hosni Mubarak. Pro-democracy activists have criticized the exclusion of Noor at a time when former members of Mubarak's National Democratic Party have been allowed to register unimpeded for parliamentary elections. Tens of thousands gathered in Washington, D.C. Sunday for a dedication of the new Martin Luther King Jr. National Memorial. Speakers included members of the King family, veterans of the Civil Rights Movement, and President Obama.
It is right for us to celebrate Dr. King's marvelous oratory, but it is worth remembering that progress did not come from words alone. Progress was hard. Progress was purchased through enduring the smack of billy clubs and the blast of fire hoses. It was bought with days in jail cells and nights of bomb threats. For every victory during the height of the civil rights movement, there were setbacks and there were defeats.
President Obama also referred to the Occupy Wall Street protests during his speech at the MLK National Monument.
If he were alive today, I believe he would remind us that the unemployed worker can rightly challenge the excesses of Wall Street without demonizing all who work there. That the businessman can enter tough negotiations with his company's union without vilifying the right to collectively bargain. He would want us to know we can argue fiercely about the proper size and role of government without questioning each other's love for this country, with the knowledge that in this democracy, government is no distant object, but is rather an expression of our common commitments to one another.
The dedication ceremony was originally scheduled for August 28th, the 48th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C., but was delayed because of Hurricane Irene. The Native American elder and activist Eloise Cobell has died at the age of 65. A member of the Blackfeet Nation, she was the lead plaintiff in a landmark 1996 lawsuit claiming the Interior Department had misspent, lost, or stolen hundreds of billions of dollars meant for Native American land trust account holders dating back to the 1880s. After a nearly 15-year legal battle, the U.S. government settled for $3.4 billion, the largest government class action settlement in U.S. history. The beneficiaries are estimated to be about 500,000 people. Eloise Cobell also helped found the first bank to be owned by an American Indian nation, the Blackfeet National Bank, which is now the Native American Bank. In 2009, she spoke in Washington, D.C. when the landmark settlement was announced.
Although we have reached a settlement totaling more than $3.4 billion, there is little doubt this is significantly less than the full accounting to which individual Indians are entitled. Yes, we could prolong our struggle and fight longer, and perhaps one day we would know down to the penny how much individual Indians are owed. Perhaps we could even litigate long enough to increase the settlement amount. But we are compelled to settle now by the sobering realization that our class grows smaller each year, each month, and every day as our elders die and are forever prevented from receiving their just compensation.
Eloise Cobell, Blackfeet Nation elder, dead at the age of 65. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm